Everybody, welcome today for our Public Council briefing on the long-term plan. So please stand for a karakia, please. Well done, you.
Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā tara ki tai. He hiake ana te atakura, he tio, he hoka, he hauhu, tihei, mariora.
Thank you very much. So before we crack into this, I'd just like to read what I'm endeavouring to get out today, or what we should all think about getting out of today. Good morning and welcome to our latest public briefing on our LTP. Today's presentation will cover where we are at and talk through 5 potential options for the draft. Under the Local Government Act, it is my job to lead the LTP process, and part of that is giving guidance to staff on what should be included in the draft LTP for the Council to consider. That is why I'm seeking some guidance on what to ask staff to include in the draft LTP that I will present on the 14th of February. It is important to remember that we are not making any decisions today. You're helping me build a draft for us to debate in February. If you don't like anything in the draft, then you can move an amendment in February for us to consider. We will be running amendments as in the same process as the previous annual plan. Please submit any amendments by the 20th of December to ensure we have staff advice for us so we can debate it. Any late amendments may fail to get adequate staff advice for Council to make an informed decision, and I may have to rule them out of order. So the secret to success is here, get them in as soon as you think of it. Because we have a few people away today, I will need to make some judgments on what I ask staff to include in the draft for February, based on today's attendance and the views of those who aren't here. Please bear with me as I make these calls when something is marginal. One thing I'd like to get out of this briefing and the one next Wednesday is to identify our appetite for certain proposals so we can focus on the more contentious debates in February when we decide on the draft that goes out for consultation. And of course, the public can tell us what they think of our draft after the 14th of February. With that, the questions for discussion are the targeted rate range, rating for renewals, 6 rating proposals, capital program figure, PT, MCR and footpath inclusions. With that, I'll ask the team to kick off with their presentation and we will stop at each point to discuss and give guidance for the draft. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And so Bruce and I will present the first part of the session this morning. Understand, of course, that we're just at the pointy end of this and that there's a significant amount of people behind us been working a great deal to get to this point. So the purpose of today's meeting is just to share where we are in developing the LTP as the Mayor has outlined, and seek some feedback and guidance on where we're going. There's some key issues we'll touch on, and then we'll confirm get the approach for what Council leading us. So there'll be a bit of a background of where we are. We'll talk about the current rates position, so where we're currently sitting. We'll touch on the proposals and savings options. There's some rating issues, which we'll go into a bit more detail. Proposed CapEx and renewals, and then what the steps after from today will look. So just on the background, there will be no surprises here in the comments on this sheet. Christchurch City Council is not alone with the rest of the country in the challenges that we're facing through significant non-controllable cost increases, inflation, interest rates, insurance. There's significant impacts on council. That's hitting us, hitting Christchurch City highest in the first 2 years of the LTP. Add to that, we've got the Takaha rates impact for year 1 and year 2 of the LTP. In summary, Takaha has about 3% in year 1, both taking into CapEx and the OpEx position. So we've got some significant challenges in front of us that we've endeavoured to work through. We've got limited options, and like I say, we've been bombarded with a large number of non-controllable costs. The What Matters Most survey that Council undertook earlier in the year was really, I think it's excellent, and the results that we got back and the engagement that we got from the community and what the things that the community wanted Council to focus on. I thought that was a great tool and a great, I guess, engagement with the public as well. So what did it say? It says we should prioritise retaining services and maintaining assets. The most important element within that survey was on climate and how we were preparing for the climate impacts on Council. So like I said, we found it a very useful and good guiding tool. There's been extensive briefings with councillors, as the Mayor has outlined, since July in public and some in not. So we've, in building the draft LTP to this point, we've focused on the letter of expectation that staff receive from Council. So that's been our guiding principles. So where are we sitting? The current rates position. So currently we're looking at where we indicate where we were at the 23-24 annual plan when that was adopted, 11.6. There's been some non-controllable changes, and I'll touch on some of the more detail on that coming through. And that brings us for year one of the long-term plan at 13.3%. Still sitting very high in year two, 10.3, and then it starts to drop down a bit to 5.2 in year three. That's as it's currently sitting. So how is that 13.3 and the 10 broken down? So you can see the base is sitting at 10.6, and then you can see Te Kaha coming in. So this is the CapEx portion only. So for year one, that 13.3 is made up of a base of 10.6 and Te Kaha at 2.7%. There's been a number of OPEX proposals, which we'll touch on, sitting at 5.2% for year one. Then they are falling off in the latter years. With savings options that we've looked at primarily for year one, because that is the huge jump. So that's sitting about 4.2%. Well, we're not going to go into the details on those yet. That'll be for another time. But those are the high level numbers that we're currently looking at. So breaking down that the 13.3, how was that achieved? So this is what this slide is outlining. Inflation, like I said earlier, is a key contribution to that at 5.3%. We have a strategy of rating for renewals. So what that means is rather than debt funding renewals, actually move that across from debt funding to rating. And so that's following that strategy, that's 2.1%. We're going to cover this subject in more detail in later slides. There's been a mix of increase in OPEX and decrease in revenue, sitting at 2.2%. You recall from when we adopted the current year, there was subventions that we used, which were able to keep rates down. So now that they've been used, we've got to fill that gap. So that's an extra 1.9% sitting in there. Debt servicing driven by the current year borrowing is 3.5%. That includes Te Kaha, understanding that up until this year, the funding of Te Kaha was by government funds. They've now exhausted those almost, and so we are using council's borrowings to do that. Debt servicing for the next year is a further increase of 1.4%. Lower interest due to repayment of debt. So what that means is the debt wasn't as high as we had initially anticipated that it was going to be. So there's a reduction there. Trans waste dividend growth. We're expecting well, they've indicated it's going to be higher dividend coming through. It's a 1.1% coming through. And we're expecting a growth in our rating database. So that's the population and the number of households is growing. So that makes up the 13.3% sitting there. as you can see, there's limited options around key drivers and that to be able to move that at all. So just looking at the next slide, looks perhaps there's a lot of moving bits in that, so just taking through. So where we're currently, the black line is where we're currently sitting. So you can see rising up to 13.3 and then dropping to 10, just over 10 for the following year, and then further down and towards the latter years, even further going through. So that's where it's currently sitting. But the red line is where we expected things to be when we adopted the current plan. So, and the orange line is there's the following year plus Te Kaha. So you can see that increase there, and like I said, that significant increase because of inflation and interest rates, and the key costs are driving that. There's a lot of detail, and both from expenditure, operational expenditure, operational income, rates, how we fund our debt, the capital program itself. So this slide here sets out the levers, and there's relatively few levers that we have to move. The level of rates, percentage of rates increase sitting at top, the level of capital OPEX, and looking at different scenarios. But it's difficult to get the right balance. It is a balancing act, so it's a compromise in a number of those spaces to get to the final result. So operational proposals that are being considered, external funding requests, we've got $6.6 million sitting in there. And I guess with the CCOs, pulling them to one side, there's $36.6 million in that space. So there's a potential of a CCHL dividend reduction in that space, which is the largest portion of that. And then there's internal costs of 0.8%. So that's driving the 5.9% for the current year, and as I said, it's you can see that decreasing over the following years going back. So where do we sit, and what is the target that we need to be aiming at, and what is it required to get there? So the top part, the 13.3%, I've touched on that a number of times already this morning. So that's saying if we want, to move from the 13.3 to a different number, that indicates, this table indicates what level of dollars and operating spend needs to occur to achieve that. Understanding that a 1% rate increase is just under about $7 million, $6.85 million equals 1.1% movement. So if we were aiming for 12%, then we'd need to find an additional $9 million off what we've currently got. If we get to 9%, we'd need to find $30 million. But if we were to say 15%, then there's $12 million additional that could be put in. But that's the 13.3. So the numbers that I've outlined before, the 5.9 and the likes, that takes us up to 19.2%, assuming all proposals are accepted. So that's a much more challenging space to be, to get rates down to 12 or 15. So I'm happy to take any questions on that particular slide, because it's there's a few things in there if there are any.
Okay, this is where I'll ask that. So, okay, thank you very much. Have we got any questions? Because we're at the point now where we need to give you guidance on where you want to go forward. Because the main thing for all of what we're doing today, give guidance to staff so they can go away and work over Christmas time. There's no use us coming back and doing this at the end of January and then staff running around like headless chooks trying to do this for February. It's just not fair. So this is the main reason that we're here for today. So is there any questions on where Russell's up to at the moment? Pauline, yeah.
On the subvention, if you can just help me understand, because I don't, reversal of one-off subventions benefit is going to cost us 1.9%, and that increase is deferred from 23-24. So what does it mean, and when is it deferred till?
The subvention relates to, the comment on the subvention relates to, we use subventions for the current year. When we were setting the rates for the 23-24 year, yep. So we used subventions, was a one-off, okay? So we used it to keep rates down.
Yeah, instead of applying it to debt. Which we
Yes,
normally
that would have been another option.
Yeah.
But we used it to keep rates down in the operational space. So effectively that says we needed less rates income. So we've used it. And so now we've got to fill that gap that was there. So that's what that 1.9% is referring to, Councillor.
Yep. Yeah, afterpay. And then, so it's deferred from 23-24 to 24-25.
Correct.
Thank you, that's helpful. Cheers.
Thank you. Tyrone, please.
Thank you, Mayor Phil. So just, Russell, thank you. Look, just talk me through the inflation number in your in the table in the increase analysis, the 5.3%. So I'm kind of interested in the relationship between inflation and when it gets baked into our sort of our forecast, really, because like if CPI was 6% at the year ending 2023, I'd assume that was already June 2023. I'd assume that was already baked into our costs for 23, 24, 20. So I'm just kind of interested why 5.3%? Is that real? Because surely there's a lag between the inflation number and when they kind of roll into the costs of things. I mean, it feels a bit too low to me.
I guess not everything will move at the same rate when we're talking about, through you, Mr. Mayor, through at the current rate when we're talking about inflation. So that's been the jump that we've seen in the costs, both from Burrell and through indications from, like I say, insurance and other factors as well coming through. So, yeah, so we use Business Economic Research Limited, or the sector does sector-wide. So we use those numbers to come through. So while CPI and like council's inflation is different, or council's cost increases are different to CPI. So there's a mix of things in that space, but we rely on the Burrell numbers too. And they, over the 20 years, they've been reasonably accurate. Okay. So the sector uses those numbers. Okay, so that's we're confident. Well, I mean, how confident can you be, but we're reasonably confident in that. But thanks for the question.
Okay. Yeah, where's he gone? Is he? Victoria.
Thank you, Russell. I've got two questions. The first one's in relation to the rating base growth. I'm just keen to understand what is the data that underpins that, and is that conservative, and how up to date is it, and is there any room for movement there?
So yes, you're right in both counts. It is. We have moved it. We've been very conservative in the past, so like 0.8%. But we're seeing a level of growth. We use this number based on other stat surveys. QV give us data. So this is based on that. Now, the closer we get to the June, the more accurate we'll be able to be in anticipating that. So there's an element of conservativeness. We don't want to push the boat out too far and then have to crawl back. So, but we're comfortable with that position at this time, understanding that we're still 6 months away from the end.
So that could change?
That could change.
Okay. My second question sort of is on the tail end of Councillor Fields, and I'd like you to help me understand the inflationary component when it comes to day-to-day business for the council with contract letting. when we let a contract, are they ordinarily adjusted for and have a escalation and an inflation component within a contract? And if that is the case, how does that come into play with the inflation component in our overall setting of our long-term plan?
That's a great question. There's significant work in that place when we look at contracts and what is the inflationary impact on contracts throughout the coming years. So every contract, well, most contracts will have an inflationary component. So we'll look at that and we'll get the advice from the procurement team on what that does throughout each of the contracts. Some will be percentage, some are set. Are some set?
Yes, they're generally based on quarterly CPI, bitumen prices, those sort of indexes.
Yeah. So yes, we take that into consideration through each contract. Yeah.
Have we been getting that right over recent times? And is there an adjustment in this figure here that accounts for that? Or are we on track? What I'm trying to figure out is whether we're playing some catch-up because we haven't quite had sufficient components within our contracts, or whether this is actually, I feel like I'm digging myself a hole slightly because I know it's really complex. But the issue for me is just some confidence around how we are accounting for inflation in our capital projects, and hoping that we're not coming unstuck when we're coming to resetting our long-term plan by having to recoup the inflationary adjustments in our programs.
Through you again, Mr. Mayor. Look, it's another great question. Like significant work goes into this to make sure we can get as close as we can, but we're not going to be we're not going to be 100%. And so there will be an element of ebbing and flowing in this, but it's certainly not. I'm not aware of it being a significant move from one year to the other and needing a catch up. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to confirm that outside of the central government funding and council funding, there's no external funding going into paying for Te Kaha. So we have zero regional contribution towards the capital and zero philanthropic contribution towards it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct. There's been nothing budgeted in that space.
Right. Is there anything that we can do to start applying to places like Rata, to our neighbouring councils for that capital contribution?
I'd need to take some advice and come back to you on that, Councillor. I'm not aware.
I know where you're coming from, Yanni. It's not really Russell's department.
And Rata has made it very clear what they're really concentrating on, and this would not be it.
Well, if you look at stadiums around New Zealand, a lot of them have had contributions from their major philanthropic trusts towards their capital costs.
But Rata has made it clear.
And they've also had regional contributions as well. So I'm just wondering what more we can do as a council to try and get some external support, given that Te Kaha is one of the biggest costs that we're facing. And
Mary has got a little bit of advice she might be able to give.
So the operator, Venues Otatahi, are seeking to secure third-party funding for things like the commissioning and different components of the building. So work is well underway in that sphere for that. And we will continue to look at options for regional contribution or any other options, but it's been very clear from our regional partners so far that they're not of a mind to give some funding, and also it was clear when the government put in its funding that was to make up the regional contribution to it. So I think that actually to keep on this trade is going to get us nowhere, but we will continue to look for both sponsorship funding, naming rights, and also philanthropic funding for various components.
Thank you, Mary. Tyrone, please.
Thank you, Mayor Phil. So, just backtracking to a question that was asked earlier of just the discussion around the rating-based growth. So just a variation on that question. So The volume of of consents for residential new builds in Christchurch over the last, well, let's say in 2022, for example, outstripped like peak rebuild by a considerable volume, right? So is that? I mean, that's my understanding. Is that a fair comment?
Anecdotally,
I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Like, you know, the Stats NZ numbers would say that.
yeah. Anecdotally, through you, Mr. Mayor, anecdotally, that's our understanding as well. But like I say, we use the QV, we talk to the QV folk, we get Stats NZ. You know, we look at a number of sources too when we look at this. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's reasonable to assume that there will be some flow through into our. I mean, again, I understand the need to be conservative, but just so I understand it correctly, it's reasonable to expect that there would be some flow through into our rates take essentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so for the current year, we're ahead of where we thought we would be when we set the rates the following year, previous year. So our level of rates, I guess, growth is higher than we thought. And as I said before, normally we take a very conservative approach. I'm not saying this isn't, but it's less conservative than we have done in the past. We've been normally, we'd say 0.8%. So we're 100, we're 50% up on that, saying at 1.2%, and we're expecting that there'll be, we're hopeful of there being some upward movement in that the closer we get to June. So post consultation, we should have.
Okay, thank you. I'm not trying to trip you up. I just kind of wanted to make sure my reading of the stats was correlated with kind of that sort of those sorts of numbers and that sort of thing. So thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, Tyrone, you're right. We don't want to, Russell and Co don't want to over-rev themselves and over.
We don't want to set unrealistic expectations. I just
want to make a bullet that's going to get fired back.
No, I understand.
Okay.
Yep.
Sarah, please.
Thanks so much for that. Just checking on the information on the CCOs, the change in the potential levels of funding to and from the CCOs is put down as a sort of proposal or request. But when it comes to CCHL dividends, that's not something that's decided by council sort of as a accept or deny as sort of a request. It's more of a thing that CCHL decide based on a range of factors. Is that right?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's normally a conversation that council would have with CCHL. I understand going past that's been the practice. The council sets out their expectations, and so then the dividends will be. So yeah.
Yeah, but it's something that council doesn't decide.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, understand what you're saying. And can we stipulate that it has to be a set amount? I'm not sure that we can do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And
but it is a discussion. Yeah, it's a discussion.
Yeah. So we've got updated figures now, and we can start putting those in. Is that right?
From CCHL?
Yeah.
Yes, from initially what they've said.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. And we're getting on with time as well. Victoria, and then we'll go towards guidance for after Celeste has had her question. Victoria, please.
Thank you. I'm sorry to labour this inflation point. I've just been mulling it over. When I look at page 7, can you pull that up?
Page 7.
Which was page 7?
I don't know. This one.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it says 5.3, including insurance market conditions. I'd like to understand what else is included and how is that sum calculated? Do we have eyes over that? I wonder what your thoughts are, Mr. Mayor, on whether that's something that we need to be looking at. I'd like to understand how that figure is made up.
Do you want to answer?
And is it something we've already seen and I've missed it? There's quite a lot of information before us and I may have missed it. Perhaps you can either direct me to that or happy to take it offline and get a bit of a one-on-one and understanding how that is.
Okay, yeah, well, we can take it offline. As we had the other day, our insurance premiums have gone up 129%.
Yeah, I'm conscious that insurance is a really big component of that, and I know that we don't have control over that. I'm just trying to understand, and I can't recall what the other components are that make up that 5.3. Is anyone else interested in looking at that, or is it just my own upskilling?
I'm sure Russell can come back to you and tell you what that is in time, not now.
Yep.
It'll be in there somewhere, won't it?
We haven't, I guess, gone through all the levels of the numbers that make that up. There's some high level numbers that are driving that overall inflation that we apply. We look at the contracts, like you've asked before. What's the inflation provision in that? So we calculate that. We've had insurance brokerage, we've had audit fee, we've had a number of significant increases across that space. And so that's putting all those together comes to the 5.3. But we can break that down further. We can show the bigger chunks of that,
Yep.
what that looks
I'm
like.
happy with the higher level at this stage. I don't want to create more work for you. But the higher level will do as a pretty good starting point. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Celeste? And then we'll get into guidance. Okay. So now what we've got to do, and we are not voting, we are giving guidance on where we would prefer the staff to go and work on the proposed rates increase. So who wants to kick it off? I'm thinking that we should be somewhere in the band of 9 to 12%.
Okay.
Sarah?
My preference is to not set a band, but to look at individual proposals and what they mean for the city and make a decision on whether each individual proposal is needed or not, and then have a number at the end of that. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else like to hit? Aaron?
I prefer to set a band. We very often get told by the public to cut our cloth to suit, and we need to do that because this is more about what's affordable for the public, not what's desirable for the public. And so you've got to work out what's the most we believe they can afford to pay, not go what's the most things they would like. Now, how do we pay for it? And I think we need to flip that on its head for a change and go, look, there's a limit to how much people can take. And we need to be mindful of that. So set that number and then find it. And if it doesn't fit in, it does not come in that year. But people are at breaking point. And for anyone to think different is irresponsible.
Pauline, please.
Look, I think Aaron's right. It's a chicken and an egg thing. This is just guidance. It doesn't mean it's set in concrete, but what it does is it gives staff an opportunity to try and build this framework that is not inflexible. It is, we can find movement in there, but it's just giving a kind of an indicative range. I think that is probably a fairly acceptable and logical range that we should be aiming at, trying to fit things in. If there are other things that come up that the public want that don't fit in there, we can have when it comes to a vote in February for the draft, we can bump it up, or for stuff people want to take out, we can knock it down. So I think it's quite good to give an indicative range, so I would support that today.
Okay. Victoria?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm on the same page. Aaron put that really articulately, as did Pauline. Thank you. I'd like to see a range. And I think from the public's perspective, when it does go out for consultation, I pick up what Sarah's saying, they need to understand what they get. So I'd like to think that in that consultation document there can be a lower range, a mid-range and a high range, so that the public can see if you pay this for your rates, this is what you get and this is what you don't get. And similarly, these are the extra things that you could get if you pay a high rate. So I think a band is the responsible thing to do.
Okay. Jake, please.
I'm just wondering, have you had a steer? If you said you'll take the views of people not in this room, there's a few of us away. Have you had any discussion with those people to understand what they'd like?
Not in the last 24 hours.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't.
Okay.
But well, from what I understand, they're happy with the band.
Yeah.
Because we've got to make it, if we can make it as easy for staff, like some of us might want 3%, some of us might want 23%, but we know that's unrealistic. We've got to be realistic and say, guys, head in this direction and we'll see what pops out. Because as Pauline said, the public will say, oh, this is too high, we might up it, we might lower it, and going forward then. So I just think we just give it, it's all it is guidance of where we maybe should head. Okay, so you all good? Andre?
Yeah, I agree. We need to set a steer and target a band like that, and just the process needs to be as transparent as possible. We need to communicate with the public however we can to make sure they understand what a certain rate would mean for the services, for the infrastructure, what the alternatives are. The more transparent we can be, the better. It's no good us talking about wanting lower rates, but not actually talking about what that will mean, and vice versa. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Keogh in that sentiment that our ratepayers, hey, each of us are ratepayers as well, are hurting, and we've got to try and be realistic as to how much we can actually labour on them. I think cutting our cloth to meet what people can afford is very wise. Setting a band to aim at is, I think, wise for us to give staff the steer as to where we want to head. But at the same time, we've really got to be, as Councillor Moore puts it, very transparent and give the options of you'll get this for your money, you'll get that for your money, and then people can choose what they want through the consultation. Do they want to pay more and get more, or do they want to pay less and get less? So certainly keen to give a steer.
Yeah, good question, Mark. Okay, so we might as well move on. No more questions. So is everyone generally for guidance, not voting, on 9 to 12? Okay, we'll just have a show of hands for Russell. 9 to 12?
Yeah.
Sorry?
I'm just not clear on one thing.
Yes.
If, for example, the band gets pushed down lower than 13.3, does that mean that there's potential for some of that percentage to be pushed forward into the 25, 26 or 26, 27 F-wise?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, that's a great question. So it depends on how we get there, whether we can lower or move some expenditure out from year one to a following year, then that's exactly what will happen. We've indicated we're already sitting at 10.3% for year two, based on where we're currently sitting at 13.3 for one. So you lower the one and the year two will jump. So really we're looking across the 10 years, but we're significant increases in year one and year two of the LTP. So it is a bit like a seesaw where you lower it in one, it will pop up higher later.
Okay, that makes me nervous. So keen for low, medium and high ranges will be okay.
Yeah, and I'd just like to say I shouldn't have said show of hands because that looks like votey stuff and we're not voting on anything, we're just giving guidance. Or have we got general consensus that we'll lean towards 9 to 12%? Victoria?
Feels like you're asking us to eat a dead rat.
I'd just like these guys to go away with a bit of a steer on where we would like to head them. Sarah?
For me, we're currently sitting on sort of the 14%, and even at that level, not accepting proposals and things means we're not increasing our adaptation planning, means that our water infrastructure is likely to go backwards over time, and so I'm not comfortable with putting something in front of the public where those things happen.
Tim?
Keeping in mind that we are looking at a hump in the next couple of 3 years, I think to give a guide to staff, yes, I support that, looking at using that as the guide and putting the bands out with regards to when we go out to the public for consultation, to let them know, and if they want something, this is what it's going to cost, if they want to pull back or increase or whatever. But I mean, right across the board, it's not just this council, it's everywhere, and it's in everybody's homes. You just saw in the paper the other day the increased cost for domestic insurance. So it's not just commercial insurance. So everybody's suffering, and we've got to be realistic of what we've got to achieve for the people of Christchurch.
Celeste, please. Celeste.
I'm not actually comfortable yet with that setting a band, and I agree with what Councillor Templeton's saying in regards to that. I really want to understand what the trade-offs are, and I don't think we're at a point where we can make some of those decisions. The other thing that I want to raise is I'm not clear on some of the areas where we've looked at raising revenue. I think Councillor Johansson touched on that, and I know there's some areas we've explored, but I think there are other opportunities because we seem to be focusing on either deferring things or cutting costs and really significant projects, such as obviously we've got earthquake legacy work and bridges that need to be repaired. And the other thing that I wanted to raise was the targeted rate around Te Kaha. I know we gave an informal steer and that there wasn't general support for that, but I don't think we had enough information to make that decision. So I'd like that to come back with more information.
We're not at a decision-making process at the moment. That's the 14th of February that comes in.
I'm keen to see some numbers around that so we can put that into the mix.
Victoria?
Sorry, I'm having another bite at the cherry. Just mulling over some of the things that have been said, I think the public are expecting us to show some leadership around this with financial prudence, recognising the pressure that our ratepayers are under. For my own benefit, and maybe some of the other newer councillors around the table, what happens if we get to a point where we're looking at a proposal which is still too high in the sense that we don't have the numbers for it and we can't agree and we don't get... We can't reach a conclusion. What happens to us? What happens, say, we end up with 13, 15% and there's not enough of us around the table that support us? Can you help me understand what happens then, please?
If I can just make a couple of comments. First of all, this is very much at the very difficult point of developing a long-term plan. We have been under no illusion from the very beginning that this was going to be a very challenging exercise. There are many factors that are impacting on the decisions and guidance that you are making. We've outlined those in terms of the inflationary environment. There are also differences of views around the table as to whether there should be a band or no band. In order for staff to be able to develop the detail, we do need a level of guidance. And what you seem to be saying, for those of you who are of a mind to adopt a band, that the 9 to 12%-ish has some level of consensus acceptance. That said, the other argument is to put forward some specific options within the LTP where it is possible to seek guidance from residents as to whether they would be comfortable to increase rates to accommodate those specific proposals. So I think it is a bit of a mix and match, and therefore if you are able to give us guidance of a band, we can then utilise that as a baseline to develop the plan in more detail and to specifically put forward some options for consideration.
Thank you, Lynn. Tyro?
Thank you, Mayor Phil. Look, I actually really commend you for going out there and and putting something out there. That's really admirable. I do want to just point out that tied up in all this, and I don't think that it's necessarily that clear to the public, but there is a Te Kaha tax of 3% on our rates, and we have to reckon with that at some point, and we have to own it. And whatever rates rise there is, that is going to be a significant portion of that. And that is just the price that the city has to pay for this project, rightly or wrongly. So it's really important that is well signposted and documented.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Look, I think we just have to face the reality of the situation. The next couple of years are going to be a lot tougher than previously they have been. I'm happy with the idea of a band, but that band has to be done or arrived at by considering, that the appetite that the public has to be able to deal with this. At the end of the day, they're the ones who really should be making the decisions on this, and we've got to give them, and we owe it to them to actually look at absolutely everything so that the next couple of years the rates are palatable. And I agree with Councillor Fields. It's a difficult situation. We've got Te Kaha that we need to get over the line, and we've got inflation of 5.3%. I mean, add those two together, and even that's a lot. as well as all the other things that we have to do. And we need to be very transparent and explain that really clearly to the general public, that this is what they are getting, so that they understand it and very clearly. Yeah, it's a difficult situation, but I really feel like we've got to pull out every stop that we can to get these rates as low as possible. Having said that, I'm kind of happy, given the current situation and given the percent increase that we're looking at just for inflation and te kaha, that we aim somewhere in that 9% region, considering what is out there and what is going on in other councils. They're faced very similar situations to us. I feel like we're heading in the right direction, but we're not quite there yet.
Good point. Thank you. Sarah, please.
Like most people, I'm concerned at the amount of angst in the community about rates increases and the cost of living at the moment. However, the community as a whole, so about 75% of those 30,000 who submitted, were in favour of the additional funding for te kaha and therefore the big bump that we've got the next couple of years. So how about I propose that we go for a 9 to 12 band plus te kaha, so that the base rates increases in that band and we focus on that, and then we keep te kaha separate, because that was something that was a huge consultation, lots of feedback. At the time, we were super clear with people that it would likely mean rates increases, and we said how much they would be. But people around the table at the time were also clear that it wouldn't mean other cuts. And so how about we choose that 9 to 12 band, but then say te kaha is separate on top of that? Just a proposal.
Aaron?
Yeah, I agree that te kaha should be separated out for two reasons. One is it's very visual. People drive through town all the time, see it. You see your nice big new shiny thing being built. So you see where your money's going. And so absolutely it should be separated out as a targeted rate, just so there's no surprises for anyone that haven't heard already. I will be in our proposals suggesting that we write to the Minister to ask for that regional targeted rate. I don't buy into this is not the year to do it. It's an LTP year. It's everyone else's LTP year. It is the only time to do it. You don't wait 3 more years to write and ask for that. So we might not get it next year, but we ask now. So that is one thing, and that's why it is good to have that out separate and everyone can see it. And like Sarah said, they've already bought into it. They know the bump's coming. So let's just and Tyrone said it as well, let's visualise the bump. Everyone can see it. And then whatever we do, and my number's lower than 9 plus te kaha. So just so everyone knows, that's where I sit, because we know the inflation number. And there's a couple of things on that. We hear last week that New Zealand's infrastructure delivery is now the most expensive in the world. Something has to give. We as a country cannot keep spending like that. There's an expectation that the incoming government, through various measures, will get on top of that. So now is not the time to be committing to other projects until we see what that future road for delivering infrastructure in New Zealand looks like, because it can't stay on the trajectory we're on. We will bankrupt ourselves. It is unaffordable, unsustainable. So there is an expectation, there's a number of changes coming from government, and also if we can keep the interest rate down this year, there's an expectation in economics that the overall interest rates for households will be coming down in approximately a year as well. So that's the time for when we look at our smoothing, that we can commit to that stuff then, because to bump everyone now as well as have those other bills is not the time. So if you've got a crystal ball, those are my predictions and how we should be playing this game. So just for no surprises around writing to the Minister, I believe Yanni's going to second it, but if he doesn't, I'm sure someone else will.
Okay, so we've got to move on. Yanni, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the reality is that there's no easy solution. But I guess one of the frustrations is, I wish like all those private consultants that we've engaged to review CCHL, just imagine if we put them to work on trying to find funding and financial models for te kaha that meant that it wasn't all falling on the ratepayer. And I know that central government's put in a contribution, But, we were in extraordinary times, and the reason that central government should have put in a contribution was the fact that they designated it in their blueprint that they forced on our city. We had other options where we could have gone, like back to Lancaster Park. It would have been a lot cheaper, and we would have been able to get on with if we'd been able to do it. So, we can't go backwards around that decision.
With what we're doing, mate.
Yeah, we can't go backwards on that decision, but it does seem to me that we need to start spending some serious attention on focusing the things that are causing us the most cost. And we're still not doing that. And I don't know how many times we need to have those discussions around this table, or what we need to do to sort of drive some really creative thinking around how we offset the massive cost of te kaha, whether it's a targeted rate, whether it's a regional levy, whether it's a local bill to get a regional contribution. I just looked at Otago, and I've set you around what happened there. The Community Trust in Otago, which had about half of the money that Rata had when it got set up, gave a $7 million capital contribution to Forsyth Bar when it was built. Why isn't our community funder giving funding towards our stadium like others have around New Zealand? I see that lotteries have a significant facilities project fund, which sadly has now closed and been put on hold for this year. But again, it's funding that goes towards capital contribution to things like stadiums across the rest of New Zealand. Why haven't we done that work? And what work can we do between now and when we need to make some of these hard decisions to try and get some funding towards the stadium, given the cost? So I support separating it out. I support having the idea, I like the idea of having a low, medium and high band of the proposed increases and letting people see what the implications are of each one. I'm still just really concerned, though, that we need to look at everything we can do to make sure that things like our water quality doesn't continue to go backwards, right? Like, to me, that's, for successive LTPs, we have failed to put sufficient budget on to improve our urban water quality. In fact, we've let it deteriorate. And what we know from doing that is it means that the costs going forward increase a lot more than what they would have been if we did it now.
I do disagree that our water quality is going backwards. It is not. The amount of work and effort that our guys are putting into it here and staff is phenomenal.
For our urban waterways. But anyway, the staff advice has been pretty clear on that.
Moving
so
right
wait. So just, the only other thing I was going to suggest that would be really, really good to do is that we need to start thinking about the renewals and the cost of...
Yeah, that's coming up next. That's the next one on the list. Right, here we go. There's more work to do. So Sarah has come up with a suggestion that and I totally agree that te kaha with everyone, that te kaha should be separate because, as you say, 30,000 people said we'd like this, and you can see it walking down the road, it's great. So if that 3%'s in there, if we go 9 to 12 with te kaha on top, if it ends up at 9 with te kaha on top, we've got 12. But if we end up at 12 and it's more, we'll put it in because it's only draft. We've just got to give these guys some direction on where we're going, otherwise we'll be here all day. All good? Yeah, move on. Sorry.
Last point.
Yeah,
Is it possible to include inflation?